Once upon a time, in the sun-kissed expanse of the kingdom of Junagadh, there ruled a monarch whose authority was as unshakable as the granite ridges that rose in the distance. His name was King Dharendra, a man whose commands carried the weight of steel, whose gaze could quiet an entire court, and whose heart, though hidden beneath the armor of rulership, beat fiercely for the honor and safety of his land. The palace in which he lived was a world unto itself, domes glistening in the golden light of morning, marble corridors whispering with the footsteps of courtiers, and gardens that seemed to bloom not merely with flowers but with the fragrance of centuries. It was within these royal walls that his only child, Princess Chandrika, moved like a streak of light, her beauty a kind of living poetry, her presence stirring admiration in all who beheld her. Her long hair flowed like dark silk in the wind, her eyes carried the softness of lotus petals floating on a still pond, and her laughter, when it came, seemed to rise like the notes of a veena played in the quiet of dusk. Among those whose heart she touched, perhaps unknowingly at first, was the king's valiant commander, Veer Bahadur. He was the kind of man whose name was spoken in both campfires and council halls, not only for his victories in battle, but for the quiet discipline that sharpened his every skill. Chandrika admired him, and, though the ways of royal women were bound by protocol and watchfulness, she liked him in a way that went beyond admiration. Whenever she went for a stroll in the palace gardens, her anklets whispering against the gravel paths, Veer Bahadur would, by some contrived necessity or casual pretext, find a reason to be there too, perhaps to inspect the guard post at the garden gate, or to check the condition of the fountains, though the water sparkled without fault. Slowly, their exchanges, at first no more than brief words, grew into conversations. Their conversations softened into a familiarity that defied the rigid etiquette of court life. It was a friendship first, but one that unfolded like the petals of a night-blooming jasmine, each meeting releasing a fragrance more intoxicating than the last. And before long, they were in love. King Dharendra was a strict ruler, a man who did not suffer indiscipline in his armies or his court. Yet he held Veer Bahadur in particularly high regard. The commander's presence by his side was like an unspoken assurance to the kingdom that no enemy, however bold, would dare challenge Junagadh's might. And indeed, none did. At 27, Veer Bahadur was already a figure of renown. His beauty was of a noble, masculine kind, the straight brows, the proud carriage of a warrior, the kind of hands that could both steady a sword in combat and coax a melody from the strings of a tanpura. His talents spilled far beyond the battlefield. He was a gifted horseman whose mount seemed to understand his very thoughts, a fencer whose blade moved like quicksilver, a dancer who could make the court musicians lose themselves in wonder, and a painter whose strokes carried the breath of life itself. In the quieter hours, away from the gazes of courtiers and guards, Chandrika and Veer Bahadur would meet at a secluded spot near the palace, a hidden alcove where a wall of creepers shielded them from sight, and where the air was heavy with the scent of champa blossoms. No one in the kingdom, not even the most watchful of the palace servants, could suspect their meetings. It was a small world they had made for themselves, fragile, secret, and precious. One day, as they sat together in the shade of an old neem tree, Chandrika looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Veer Bahadur, you are so beautiful, young, brave, and master of so many skills, she said, her voice like the murmur of cool water over stones. I want to know, how have you become proficient in so many arts? Horse riding, fencing, music, dance, painting. How is it possible for one person to possess so many qualities, and that too at such a young age? What is this energy you are blessed with? Veer Bahadur's eyes softened. Chandrika, I don't have any special energy, he replied with quiet conviction. I simply believe that if others can do something, then why can't I? So, I always give any challenge a try, and I accomplish it. Chandrika's gaze deepened, a shade of concern threading through her admiration. Listen to what I am going to say to you, she began, her words deliberate. No doubt you should have self-confidence, but without being arrogant. Because sometimes, when people of such nature cannot do what they think they can, they fall into the sea of depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Veer's smile carried a flash of pride. There is no word like impossible in my life. I am born to win. No, no, Chandrika cautioned gently. We should fear God and not be arrogant. Boasting is not a good thing. What's there to fear? Who is God? I have never seen him. Have you seen him? Veer's tone was half defiant, half curious. What are you talking about, princess? He never appears before us, and he has no existence. We have created an atmosphere of fear around ourselves. The gods and goddesses, aha! Have you seen them? There are only stories about them. Okay, leave all that stuff, Chandrika said at last, with a soft shake of her head. We should change the topic. Tell me more about yourself. How did you manage to meet me so easily, despite my father's strict guard? How did you accomplish this? Princess, it was a miracle, Veer said, and there was a glint in his eyes as he leaned slightly closer. Once, I saw you running after butterflies in the garden behind the palace. I felt as if an angel had descended from heaven. I had never seen such a beautiful fairy before. My heart fluttered, and I forgot that you were a princess. I felt restless for many days. Finally, one of my soldiers discovered the reason for my restlessness, and I told him about it. As Veer narrated the memory, his eyes sparkled, the image of that day still vivid, the glimmer of sunlight on her hair, the small gasp she made as a butterfly evaded her grasp. I mean, how you reached me, Chandrika pressed. That's an interesting story, Veer continued. He told me that his wife was your maid. The three of us made a plan and arranged for you to be called to a secluded place under some pretext. Chandrika laughed, a quick, bright sound. Ha ha. Now, Your Highness, please tell me, what happened on your side? First of all, stop calling me, Your Highness, and call me by my name, said Chandrika. Her voice, though gentle, carried the authority of one who was used to being addressed with reverence, yet longed for the intimacy of something simpler. She turned her face slightly away as she spoke, the curve of her cheek catching a shaft of sunlight that fell between the leaves above them. The wind teased a loose strand of her hair across her brow. She brushed it back absently, her eyes returning to him with a mixture of challenge and warmth. Veer Bahadur replied with a smile, the kind of slow, deliberate smile that seemed to grow from deep within him, like a lamp being lit in the dark. I apologize, I will try, he said, his voice carrying a trace of boyish hesitation, but still. I need courage. His tone softened on the last words, and for a moment he looked as though he might say more, then stopped himself. Commander, Chandrika began. Her gaze settling on him as if she wished to fix this moment forever. I heard from my maid, Sundari, who is also your soldier's wife, that there is a place near the palace where no one visits except a wise saint who reveals the truth. She said that once she had asked him something, and his answer turned out to be true. I was also eager to see that saint. When she brought me here, I saw that no one was here. Suddenly, I met you. So, I asked you where the saint was, and you easily replied that he had just left as he had some urgent work. While you were speaking, I kept gazing at you. I had never seen such a handsome young man from such a near distance before. As she spoke, her voice slowed, almost as if the memory itself had taken her captive. She could see again the narrow pathway leading from the palace grounds to that quiet place, the shadows lying long on the earth, the rustle of leaves overhead, the air scented faintly with wild jasmine. And then, the moment she had first seen him there, sunlight catching on the polished hilt of his sword, the steadiness in his eyes, the faint curve of a smile that seemed to question her soul without a word. She paused, her lashes lowering for a hurt beat before she continued. My father had confined me to the palace since, from my mother's departure to heaven, he feared that I might go astray. Hence, he never allowed me to step out of the palace. But when I saw you, my heart started pounding. I had heard a lot about your bravery. My father and all the people in the palace always praised your virtues. But when Sundari called you commander, I understood that you were Veer Bahadur. Her voice lingered on his name, not just as a title or rank, but as something alive, personal. She remembered how her pulse had leapt then, like a bird startled into flight, and how her mind had struggled to reconcile the flesh-and-blood man before her with the stories she had heard whispered in the corridors. I told you, nothing is impossible. I wanted you, and I brought you out of the palace, Commander said. The words hung between them like a standard planted after a victory, firm, unapologetic. His eyes gleamed, not with arrogance, but with the certainty of a man who saw obstacles only as stepping stones. Now, there is no need to summon you. You come to me on your own, and my heart eagerly awaits this moment. The days had lengthened into weeks, and weeks into months, each stolen meeting stitching a deeper thread between their hearts. One day, Chandrika's expression grew pensive, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the carved arm of the marble bench where they sat. It's been over 3 months now, Commander. Until when will we keep meeting secretly? What will happen if my father finds out? Her voice trembled slightly on the last words, and for a moment, she stared past him, lost in the images that her question had summoned, the stern furrow of her father's brow, the cold steel of his disappointment. I agree with you, Chandrika. We should do something. I will ask King Dharendra for your hand, replied Veer Bahadur. The conviction in his tone struck her like a sudden wind, thrilling, yet unsettling. Her hands tightened slightly in her lap. No, what are you saying? King Dharendra is my father, and I know him very well. He will never agree to this relationship. Why, Chandrika? Her eyes searched his face, almost as if she hoped the answer might already be there. I overheard him saying that he wants me to marry the Prince of Pratapgarh. Veer's voice sharpened, his brows knitting. But he is an enemy king. How can he even think like that? You are right, said Chandrika, but last night I heard him talking to the Prime Minister. She drew a slow breath, repeating the words exactly as she had heard them, as if each syllable still rang in her ears. He said, I am not afraid of any bordering state except Pratapgarh. The only way to meet him is if Chandrika marries the Prince of Pratapgarh. The proposal for marriage between the Prince of Pratapgarh and Chandrika has come several times. No, this can never happen. I will never allow it. I will talk to the king. I will defeat Pratapgarh. The steel in his voice was that of a commander preparing for battle, yet in her heart, Chandrika heard only the echo of the storm such defiance would bring. Veer Bahadur, you should not do anything that would cause sorrow to my father. I will never admit in front of the king that I love you. I am scared of my father. Then I won't be able to look into his eyes and talk for the rest of my life. It's better that I die. Her words were quiet but struck with the force of a blade wrapped in silk. Veer felt them pierce him, but before he could speak, she pressed on. Oh, then tell me another way for us to meet. If you wish, I will elope with you forever. We will go to a state where no one knows us, Veer Bahadur said. Doing so would tarnish my father's reputation. He would end his own life, but wouldn't tolerate that. I can't bear to see my father in pain under any circumstances. So what do you think then? Veer Bahadur asked anxiously. His voice held the urgency of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether to leap or be pulled back, and knowing that the answer, whatever it was, would alter the course of their lives forever. Well, now we should get separated. We have to end this relationship. The words left Chandrika's lips with the heaviness of a verdict, though her voice wavered like a candle flame in a sudden gust. For a heartbeat, even the murmuring leaves above them seemed to fall silent, as if the forest itself had paused to hear her decree. Somewhere in the distance, a koel called once, then again, its plaintive notes echoing through the garden walls like a farewell song. No. Veer Bahadur's voice broke the stillness, not in a whisper, but in a rising, unrestrained cry that thundered into the air. It was a sound torn from the core of him, echoing like the roar of a lion wounded in the heart. Hearing it, a cluster of birds burst from the nearby trees in a sudden frenzy, their wings thrashing against the branches as though startled by a predator's approach. To them, the force in his cry must have been like the hiss of a serpent hidden in the grass. The commander's eyes burned, anger and longing braided together in their dark depths. The strong bronze of his face flushed red, and his jaw clenched until the muscles in his neck stood taut. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the violence of emotion barely contained. With a sudden movement, Veer stepped into Chandrika's path, his boots pressing into the fine gravel so hard that it crunched underfoot. Then, in a gesture that defied his soldier's pride, he dropped to his knees before her. The weight of his Armoli's frame made the moment more naked, more human. He took both her hands in his palms warm and almost feverish, and lifted his gaze to hers with an intensity that seemed to hold her still. "Chandrika," he began, his voice low now, but shaking, "I have never been so helpless in my life. Why did you suddenly change? Why are you doing all this? My love means nothing to you? Am I so worthless that you even want to pay attention to your father's false pride? If I am in this state after hearing about our separation, then it doesn't matter to you at all." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but as he spoke, they spilled free, gliding down her cheeks like silver threads in the sunlight. "Forgive me, Veer Bahadur. I hurt your feelings. Maybe you were not meant for me." "This is all God's will," she continued, her voice deepening with resolve. I thought a lot, and then I carefully said all this to you. If I run away with you, my father's desire will remain unfulfilled. He will be defamed. I made a promise to my mother on her deathbed that I would never cause my father any sorrow. Veer, get up, don't do this, she pleaded, her fingers tightening around his. With a gentle but firm touch, she guided him to his feet and led him toward a broad, sun-warmed stone nearby. She sat him down, the stone cool beneath him despite the day's heat, and then lowered herself beside him. Without hesitation, she took his hand in both of hers, her grip steady now, as though willing him to draw strength from her composure. "Listen to me carefully, Bahadur," she said, her gaze fixed on him as though the rest of the world had fallen away. "It is true, absolutely true, that I love you and you love me too. But if we were ordinary individuals, it wouldn't matter. However, I am connected to the future of a kingdom. If I don't marry the Prince of Pratapgarh, that tyrant king will destroy our kingdom stone by stone. The blood of the people will flow, and lives will be lost. Even if we unite, how many women's lives will be ruined? How many innocent children will be killed for no reason? He would have attacked us by now. He is silent because he requested my hand in marriage for that spoiled and ugly prince a while ago, and my father delayed his response. That's why he is now issuing threats." Her words came in a steady current, but underneath, Veer could hear the tide of her own pain. The image she painted, of their people's blood staining the earth, of women widowed and children orphaned, seared itself into his mind. Yet his warrior's heart rebelled. "I will defeat him in battle, Chandrika. Have faith in me," Veer assured, his voice swelling with the conviction of a man who had faced steel and fire before and emerged unbroken. But she shook her head. "Veer, you know that even if you win, you will have to go through your soldiers' bloodshed and numerous other obstacles to marry me. I cannot forgive myself for a lifetime. What do you think? Am I happily arranging this marriage? Think about it. A princess who lacks nothing is being forced to marry such a prince who doesn't receive any praise. I am in such a state that I cannot even die." Her words landed like arrows, each one finding its mark. Veer Bahadur's shoulders slumped slightly, his breath catching as the edge of his anger dulled into something else, the creeping, hollow ache of understanding. "You are great, princess. I may not be as great as you, but I won't be able to live without you. I will leave this world." Her grip on his hand tightened instantly. "No, not at all, Veer Bahadur, don't do that. I am sacrificing myself to save you, my father, and the people of the kingdom. And if you leave this world, my soul will also leave this body. Rather, you should help me with such a hard decision. Promise me that you won't even think about death. Love is the union of two souls. I told you that we should separate, but that doesn't mean our love is going to end, and remember, it will never diminish. Chandrika, I don't know how to speak like you, but I won't remain in this world. But you won't die, promise. Do I have any right in your life? Chandrika asked, her voice low now, almost trembling with both fear and hope. All the rights are yours, Chandrika. Then make a promise. I promise that I won't die on my own, Veer Bahadur said at last, the words falling from his lips like stones into a deep, dark well. Yet even as he spoke them, a shadow passed through his eyes, and his voice softened with a weary finality. But before I say anything else, I also want to say that I won't stay here. I will stay far from all relationships, far from people. I don't know where I'll go, don't ask me now. It was the sound of a man withdrawing not only from love but from the very pulse of the world, retreating into some uncharted wilderness of his own heart. Look, it's getting dark. I have to go to the palace now, Chandrika said, glancing toward the horizon where the last embers of daylight bled into the coming night. The garden shadows had lengthened, and the air now held that faint coolness which presages evening. When will we meet again? Veer asked, his hand closing around hers with a quiet desperation as she began to rise. His grip was firm yet trembling, as if he feared that letting go once might mean letting go forever. I don't know if we should meet onward, but let me go for now, she replied, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed the ache she carried. How will I know if you'll come tomorrow or not? Veer pressed, his tone almost pleading. Chandrika's answer came swift, as though she wished to cut short the longing in his voice before it deepened further. Ask your God. Veer stepped forward then, positioning himself in her path like a sentry guarding the last gate to a besieged citadel. Don't go, stay here forever. For the first time in their meeting, Chandrika's composure cracked. A flicker of anxiety crossed her features. She glanced toward the palace walls in the distance, her mind conjuring the image of her father's stern face appearing suddenly at her chamber door. Let me go, Veer. If my father finds out, trouble will arise. I'm not your enemy, Veer said, groping for any reason, any excuse that might hold her a moment longer. Just one last thing, tell me, where can I meet my God, from whom I can inquire about you? She was already moving, her silken skirts brushing past the garden path, her anklets scattering faint, chiming notes into the air. Looking back over her shoulder, she called, close your eyes and concentrate between them. You will meet him someday. I have answered all the questions. No more complaints. Bye, goodbye. And with that, she slipped through the palace gates, vanishing into the shadows within. From that night onward, Veer Bahadur's life seemed to lose all its color, as though the world had been drained of its dyes and left only in shades of grey. Several days passed, yet there was no sign of Chandrika, not a glance from a balcony, not the whisper of her voice from behind the carved palace screens. Then, like a blow to the chest, came the rumors, and soon the unmistakable signs, that preparations for Chandrika's wedding had begun within the palace. Servants bustled through the streets with silks and gold, musicians were summoned, and the scent of fresh sandalwood drifted from the palace courtyards. With each passing moment, his heart smoldered hotter with jealousy, though he could not name it without tasting its bitterness. His mind urged him to flee from Junagadh altogether before the sight of her bridal procession could crush what remained of him. One night, long past the hour when the last watchman's footsteps had faded along the fortress wall, Veer gathered a few of his belongings, a blade, a flask, some cloth, and set off toward the jungle. The world around him was draped in darkness. He ran, the dry earth crunching under his boots, the night air biting against his skin, until his breath came in ragged pulls. At last, exhaustion forced him to halt. Beneath the broad, black canopy of a banyan tree, he lay himself down upon the earth. When consciousness returned with the pale light of dawn, he found himself alone, the forest whispering around him with its rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. What have I done? He thought. If I go back now, Raja Dharendra won't spare me. Then why should I go? I won't be able to witness Chandrika's wedding. And I have also made a promise not to commit suicide. The hunger in his belly soon silenced further thought. Rising, he scanned the forest until his eyes found what they sought, fruit trees heavy with their offerings. He plucked apples, bananas, and other forest fruits, their juices cool and tart upon his tongue. His thirst led him further, and soon he heard the gentle murmur of running water. A small river wound through the trees, its surface glimmering where sunlight broke through the canopy. Here, he chose to stay. He built a small hut by the river bank, arranging it for his own convenience and comfort. His soldier's training served him well. With sharp weapons he felled wood for shelter, carved stakes for defense, and prepared against the prowling of wild animals. A few days passed, and the little cottage stood ready, humble yet sturdy, a safe circle in the midst of untamed green. His days fell into a rhythm: work beneath the sun's glare, then rest when the shadows lengthened. He became so absorbed in the demands of survival that the memories of Chandrika, though never gone, came less often to wrench his heart into tears. There was solace in labor, and in the strange new world he was fashioning for himself, a world where only he and the memory of Chandrika dwelt, untouched by the noise and intrusion of the kingdom he had left behind. No trace of Junagadh remained here. No one could find him now, not even by chance. In time, his beard grew long and unkempt, for he had neither the tools nor the desire to trim it daily. The days blurred into one another. He learned he could endure with little: fruits when the trees were kind, river water to drink, the cool embrace of the current for bathing. Ever restless in his hands, Veer cleared wide stretches of the surrounding jungle, planting flowers in careful rows until the wilderness began to resemble the manicured gardens of a palace, though here, the air was free, and no guards stood at the gates. Yet one worry began to gnaw at him. If my clothes wear out, what will I wear in the future? It was no idle concern. Cloth could not be conjured from thin air in the forest. So he decided to wear only what was strictly necessary, preserving his garments for as long as possible. And when fate offered him the carcasses of wild animals that had met their end, he dried their skins with patient care, thinking ahead to the seasons when cold or modesty might demand their use. All of this took months to accomplish. The days bled into one another, each marked not by the bells of a palace clock but by the rising and setting of the sun, the whisper of the wind in the tall grass, the distant cry of wild birds. Veer Bahadur kept himself busy from the first blush of dawn until the evening shadows stretched long. His hands grew rough from carving wood, his shoulders browned beneath the sun's relentless gaze, and yet the labor never felt like punishment. It was work that kept his mind from unraveling, and his heart from drowning entirely in memories. Veer Bahadur was a man of skill and unyielding determination. Once he made up his mind, there was no turning back. The world itself would sooner bend than force him to retreat. And now, in this self-imposed exile, that same determination served a different master, not the king's orders or the battlefield's demands, but the quiet, sacred promises he had made to Chandrika. Each task completed, whether shaping the roof of his hut to withstand the rains or tending to the small patch of flowers he had planted, was not just an act of survival, but a thread in the tapestry of his vow. Fulfilling those promises, even here, far from her eyes, brought him a measure of peace. But as time passed, his workload began to decrease. The walls were sturdy, the weapons sharpened, the water source secured. He had done what was needed. The steady rhythm of building gave way to long hours where the silence pressed close, and in that silence, the past returned. Now, he would spend much of his time remembering Chandrika's words. Her last meeting with him was etched in his mind as though carved into stone. The sound of her voice, the weight of her touch, the way her eyes seemed to hold both love and finality, all of it returned to him in unguarded moments. He longed, against his own better judgment, to return to Junagadh. But he knew the Chandrika who lived there would not be his to see. Her life would be bound to another. And what of the others? They would see him not as the commander who had served them faithfully, but as a man who had abandoned his duty, a traitor to king and country. The king could even imprison him. The promises he had made to Chandrika might be forgotten, dismissed as the empty dreams of a lovesick soldier. And if he fled to another kingdom, what then? He would be no more than a nameless wanderer there, a stranger without a history, stripped of identity and trust. Several days passed under this weight, until suddenly a memory rose in him like a spark catching dry tinder. Chandrika's voice, quick, almost hurried, from that last night, "Ask your God." She had said it when he asked how he would know if she would come tomorrow or not. Now Veer had a new task, one that required no wood, no stone, no weapon, but might demand more discipline than all the rest. He planned to spend the next few days doing just that. Veer Bahadur sat in his cottage, the quiet hum of the forest wrapping around him. He closed his eyes and let his awareness turn inward, focusing between his eyelids as though that narrow space might open a door. Between his eyelids there was nothing but darkness at first, a deep and endless void. Sometimes he would choose to sit outside, where the daylight filtered through the leaves, warming his face. At those times, behind his closed eyes, he saw golden reflections dancing, as if sunlight was spilling into his very mind. At other times he sat indoors, in the shade, where the darkness deepened until it seemed to have weight. Then, all he could see were black reflections, heavy and still. As the days passed, his practice sharpened. Gradually, he began to notice something, a tiny, perfect dot appearing in his vision. Whenever he closed his eyes, it would float there, unwavering, as if it had been waiting for him all along. After a few more days of this quiet discipline, Veer Bahadur felt a sense of calm seep into him, like water slowly filling the cracks in a parched vessel. The hours slipped by unnoticed, the days melting into one another with a strange sweetness. Peace crept into his dreams, and good visions came to him in the night, dreams whose meanings he could not entirely explain, but whose aftertaste was always serene. Time passed without urgency, and many things that once seemed tangled now came clear. His mind grew tranquil, steadier, wiser, as though age had touched him without stealing his youth. Now, with the heavy labor of survival behind him, Veer Bahadur spent his days and nights in meditation. Several months went by. He had not forgotten Chandrika. Her presence still lived in the chambers of his heart, but the raw wound of their separation had begun to heal. What remained was not the sharp pain of loss, but the quiet ache of love remembered. His appearance, too, had changed. His hair had grown long and thick, which he now tied into a round bun at the crown of his head, much like the sages whose images adorned the temples of his youth. He wore a single cloth wrapped about his body, simple, unadorned, and yet he looked young and striking still, his skin bronzed by the sun, his eyes bright with a light that seemed to come from within. There was a radiance to him now, the glow of a man whose life had narrowed to its essence. His years of education and discipline had ripened into something quieter, deeper, wisdom that needed no display. One day, while the forest drowsed in the heat of the afternoon, two men came wandering through its green depths, calling out for their lost cow. Their voices carried through the trees, startling birds from the branches and setting the leaves to trembling. As they searched, they stumbled upon the clearing where Veer's small cottage stood. They stopped short, astonishment in their eyes. How had such a place, neat, blooming with flowers, alive with a sense of order, come to exist here in the wild? Cautiously, they approached, their footsteps soft against the forest floor. Through the open doorway, they glimpsed a figure seated in deep meditation, unmoving as a carved idol. The air around him seemed to hum with stillness. They stared for a long moment before one of them gasped, "You are great, Lord. You have performed a miracle." Veer Bahadur's eyes opened slowly, and he shook his head. "Don't call me Lord or great sage. I am just an ordinary person." But the men were not to be deterred. "Oh Saint, your thoughts are great. We can't understand your profound words. We are simple villagers. Our village is plagued with poverty, and every home is filled with disputes. Neighbors fight with each other. Please do something." "What can I do? I am a resident of the jungle," Veer replied, his voice even, though his mind was already turning over the picture of such a village life. "Just come to our village once and see with your own eyes," they insisted, their tone earnest. "No, for now, I won't go anywhere," Veer said. As he looked at them more closely, he noticed the signs of thirst and hunger etched into their faces, the dry lips, the faint weariness in their stance. He rose, his movements unhurried, and fetched water from his earthen pot, offering it to them with both hands. Then, with a basin, he poured water over their palms so they could wash away the dust of the journey. Only after this did he bring forth the simple cooked food he had prepared for himself, grains, wild greens, perhaps a little roasted root, and set it before them, serving them as one would honored guests. After a while, he bid them farewell, his hands coming together in a gesture of quiet respect, and the two men turned to go. Their cow, found grazing contentedly a short distance away, walked ahead with slow, swaying steps. The forest path seemed to swallow them little by little, the sound of their voices growing fainter with each turn until only the rustle of leaves remained. As soon as they arrived in their village, however, their tongues could not rest. The story of the holy man they had met began to circulate in the courtyards and narrow lanes, carried from one ear to another like a spark jumping across dry grass. And as stories often do among the illiterate and the less informed, it grew with each telling. The sage became taller, wiser, and more miraculous in their descriptions. The clearing in the jungle became a paradise. His few words of welcome became oracles. By the next morning, curiosity and devotion had woven themselves into a single cord pulling people toward the forest. Many set off at once, men and women of all ages, their bare feet raising small clouds of dust on the path. They carried baskets laden with rice, fruit, he, and sweets, not only to sustain themselves but to offer to the saint they imagined. When Veer saw them approaching, he understood immediately. The memory of the two men from the day before was fresh in his mind, and he guessed without effort that they must have carried word of him back to their people. The baskets heavy with food confirmed it. As the people arrived, they pressed forward eagerly, placing their offerings at his feet as was the custom, then bowing low to touch those feet in reverence. But Veer's voice, firm yet without harshness, cut through their motion. "No one will touch my feet. And why have you all brought these things? Keep them aside and let everyone sit down." His gaze swept over the crowd, not in judgment, but in steady insistence, until they obeyed, settling themselves in a wide semicircle upon the ground. He then called to a young boy who had edged close to the hut, his eyes round with both awe and shyness. "Son, bring a stone vessel from inside and give water to everyone, one by one." As the boy hurried to obey, Veer's mind turned over the practical challenge before him. How to feed such a large number of people? In the jungle, every resource had to be stretched like a bowstring, but here was a chance to turn their own offerings into a shared meal. An idea took shape. "Let two individuals stand up," he said, his tone carrying the quiet authority of a man used to giving orders that were followed. "I will distribute all these offerings equally among everyone. Take the banana leaves that have been washed in the hut." The people obeyed readily, and soon the air was alive with the sound of food being unwrapped and shared. The fragrance of ripe fruit mingled with the earthy scent of fresh banana leaves, and laughter rose here and there as neighbors exchanged bites of their own dishes. Everyone enjoyed the food that they themselves had prepared, but there was a peculiar sweetness in eating it here, under the canopy of trees, in the company of the sage they had come to see. The barriers of home and hearth dissolved for a time. Here they were not farmers or widows or merchants, but simply guests at a single, wide table. They also got a chance to speak with him, something they had not dared to imagine when setting out from the village. Veer, for his part, found it unexpectedly pleasant to talk to people again after so long. Words flowed more easily than he had thought they would. As evening approached, the golden light filtering through the trees softened to umber, and the breeze carried the scent of cooling earth. The people began to take their leave, one group at a time, their heads turning back for a last look before the forest swallowed the clearing from sight. Veer spoke kind words to them as they departed, his tone warm, steady, and free of the hauteur that some saints carried like armor. In the quiet that followed, Veer reflected on the day. Being knowledgeable in various fields, he had found that his mind responded to their questions with a clarity he had not consciously summoned. He was carrying out every action with great wisdom, as if some invisible hand had placed the right words upon his tongue. It seemed to him that the immaturity of his earlier days had fallen away like an old skin. Now, he felt again, though in a different sphere, like the brave general he had once been, his presence commanding but his weapon now words instead of steel. A strange aura seemed to gather about him, and he wondered, perhaps it's because I'm meeting people after a long time that my nature has changed. And also, people here look very innocent, very afraid. People began to come daily to visit Veer Bahadur and speak with him. Each day, they brought their own food, which they would share and eat together in the clearing before his hut. The villagers usually arrived in the morning, carrying baskets of fruits, grains, and simple meals, and before the sun dipped behind the horizon, they would return to their homes with lighter hearts. It was then that an elderly woman, her back slightly bent but her eyes bright, stepped forward. "There is a lot of conflict in my house," she said. Veer inclined his head. "Why? What happened?" The woman sighed, the lines on her face deepening. "My daughter-in-law scolds me a lot and even restricts my food intake. My son doesn't listen to me either, and even my husband favors my daughter-in-law. What should I do? Please suggest a solution." Veer studied her for a moment, his expression calm but attentive. Then he spoke. "When you were a young woman, you might have troubled your daughter-in-law and made your son and husband upset. At that time, your mind was very active, and there was strength in your body. So you owe debt to your daughter-in-law. If you don't want to pay the debt in this birth, then you will have to pay it in the next, which will come as bad luck to you. Now, it's your daughter-in-law's turn." Everyone listened intently. Veer's posture was relaxed, his voice neither loud nor hurried, yet the authority in it was unmistakable. His calm, composed presence seemed to draw the very air still around him. His face, lit by the slanting rays of the sun, carried a handsomeness now deepened by serenity. The elderly woman stared at him as he spoke, caught between surprise and recognition. He was speaking the truth, and she knew it, but what puzzled her most was how such words could come so naturally to him, like blossoms opening without effort. The others, too, were captivated, drawn not only to the content of his counsel but to the dignity with which it was given. Veer continued, "Even now, there is time, pay off your debts. Accept your daughter-in-law's behavior, bear it, and let her do whatever she wants. Listen, when you go home, help your daughter-in-law as much as you can in her chores. Don't get angry over anything she says, thinking that you are repaying your debt." In that moment, he seemed less like a man and more like a divine being, his words carrying the weight of something larger than himself. A few days later, the same elderly woman returned. This time, there was a lightness in her step that had not been there before. She bowed slightly and said, "Baba, for a few days I did just as you told me. After some time, my daughter-in-law started feeling sorry for me, and now she doesn't even let me do any work. I am really thankful to you for your blessings." Her voice was bright with gratitude, but beneath it Veer could hear the quiet astonishment of a life unexpectedly changed. One day, as the afternoon sun mellowed and the air in the clearing grew heavy with the scent of blooming wildflowers, the people gathered before Veer with an unusual request. Their faces were expectant, their voices united in a murmur that carried a warmth beyond ordinary petition. They wished to hear devotional songs, the sacred verses and melodies that had been the heartbeats of their festivals, the comfort of their grief, the offerings in their worship. Veer searched his memory and found, among the half-forgotten chambers of his mind, the strains of a few hymns he had once sung in Junagadh. In those days, the songs had been part of palace gatherings, temple ceremonies, and the quiet hours after victory in battle. Now, here in the forest, they returned to him, not as courtly performances but as living threads of memory. He began to recite them one by one. His voice was steady, unadorned, yet carrying the weight of sincerity. The words fell into the silence like drops into a still pond, each verse rippling outward in the hearts of the listeners. When he paused, the rest of the songs were taken up by the people themselves. Some sang in low, wavering tones, others lifted their voices high, their faces lit with devotion. Veer himself did not sing further. He simply sat, listening to the rise and fall of their voices, letting the sound settle into the air like incense smoke in a shrine. The following days brought more than song. People began to bring drums whose leather skins had been softened by years of worship, cymbals whose edges caught the sunlight, and other simple instruments, each one offered in reverence, placed carefully in a corner of his hut as though it were a sanctum. And then something remarkable happened. Out of their own joy, without any instruction from Veer, the people built a makeshift roof over the clearing. It was nothing more than bamboo poles and woven leaves, but it gave them shelter from the sudden rains that could sweep through the forest. They even paved the narrow path leading from the edge of the village to the jungle with flat stones, so that the journey would be easier for the old and the infirm. Why were they doing this? Veer wondered. Even after his repeated refusals, they worked with devotion, their hands busy and their faces alight with purpose. In their hearts, there was a shared belief. Whenever someone did something for Veer, whether bringing food, singing a song, or lifting a stone for the path, their own troubles seemed to dissolve, often without them even speaking of them. The news spread quickly. Soon, not only the people from nearby villages but even the inhabitants of the Shivgarh kingdom began making their way to the jungle. They came in all forms, children with wide eyes clutching at their mothers' hands, men carrying baskets of grain, elderly women leaning on sticks, their feet steady but slow. Each bore their own stories, their own burdens. And, in a pattern that defied reason, there were those who returned again and again because something in their lives had shifted for the better after visiting. If a woman who could not conceive came to him once or twice, she would later be blessed with a child. It was spoken of in whispers and proclamations alike. Veer knew, with a certainty that was almost uncomfortable, that he was not the cause of these changes. He sat in the quiet of his thoughts and asked himself, how was this wave growing on its own? Why did it swell day after day, drawing more and more to his side? And in the same thought came a shadow of fear. What if, one day, people's troubles stopped being resolved? Would their faith in him vanish? He had never made promises to anyone. He had never claimed to possess the power they believed in. If there was any force at work, where was it? If this was the doing of some divine entity, then where was that entity hiding? Why did it never appear to him, not even in his dreams? Veer's mind returned to his own truth. I haven't gone to anyone, he thought. I have never summoned anyone to me. I ran away from Chandrika. Yes, I meditated. It strengthened my mind and sharpened my intellect. I showed people the right path, but that is something any educated person can do. And yet, despite my countless refusals, why is such a crowd forming? I can't understand. In the midst of these thoughts, he folded his hands together, his eyes closing as the murmur of the assembly faded into the background. His voice, low and steady, carried into the still air. Omnipotent power, if you truly exist as a force, reveal your identity to me. I haven't acknowledged you yet. I, Veer, make this promise. If you reveal yourself and make me recognize you, I will spend my entire life following your commands. That day, the gathering was vast. There were not hundreds, but thousands of people present. They sat in rows that stretched far back into the forest, their clothing a patchwork of colors beneath the green canopy, their faces turned toward him with an attentiveness that seemed almost tangible. Veer was not in the habit of asking questions of the assembly, but today something in him stirred differently. His mind urged him to speak, to reach beyond the silent exchange of presence. "I can't answer everyone's questions in full," he began, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, "as I am as you all. Still, some of you may ask a question, and I will try my best to reply." A man rose from the crowd, his manner humble yet carrying the urgency of someone who had long waited for this moment. "Holy Baba," he said, "I have come from Shivgarh. I have never spoken to you before. I came here to share many troubles. When I first arrived here with a severe problem in my house, I couldn't get any chance to speak to you. And so, with a heavy heart, I went back without conversation. But as soon as I reached home, my wife told me that our family problem was resolved in a miraculous way. Since then, every time I have come here, my troubles have been almost resolved. But I have never had the opportunity to speak with you. When I came here, I was a very poor, sick farmer. Within a few days, by your grace, I am now a healthy and prosperous farmer with no financial difficulties. That's why I happily built 5 rooms behind your cottage." Veer was astonished upon hearing this. The man's voice had been plain, without embellishment, yet the account was so striking that it lodged in Veer's mind like a stone in still water. He lifted his gaze to the multitude and asked them to raise their hands if they had a similar story. Almost every hand rose, except those belonging to the newcomers. The sight was like a field of tall grass stirred by a single wind, movement everywhere, a silent testimony that left Veer momentarily without words. Veer began to contemplate calmly, letting the murmur of the forest and the distant hum of the gathering wash over him as his thoughts settled into order. He had never been one to leap to conclusions without careful reflection. What was happening here? How had this strange tide of devotion risen around him? He recalled how, in the earlier days, men would mostly visit on holidays or in the evenings, when their fields were quiet and their trading done. They came in their work clothes, with calloused hands and sunburned faces, often in small groups, seeking counsel or simply the comfort of being heard. But mornings were different. In the quiet hours after dawn, it was mostly women who approached him, women carrying offerings in baskets lined with banana leaves, women whose anklets tinkled faintly as they crossed the clearing, women who sometimes lingered longer than their questions required. Some came for blessings, some for guidance, and some, he suspected, were drawn, though they might never say it aloud, by the youthful, striking appearance of the man they now called the Holy Baba. Veer, however, kept his mind anchored in meditation. If people approached him with their troubles, he would listen, and if their questions sought answers, he would give them as truthfully as he knew how. Beyond that, he did not seek to bind anyone to him. Yet the truth was undeniable. Many villages and towns had begun to prosper since his arrival in the jungle. Crops yielded better harvests, quarrels eased, businesses revived. But not all prospered. The shops of several priests, men who had long made their living by performing ceremonies, reciting mantras for a fee, and conducting rituals for the faithful, had seen their income wither. One by one, these men gathered together in shaded courtyards and dim rooms, their voices sharp with indignation. One priest, his voice thick with bitterness, spoke first. "Let's defame this holy Baba by spreading rumors about him among the people." Another, younger but with eyes narrowed in calculation, said, "He appears youthful and handsome. Most of the young women and daughters are infatuated with him." A third leaned forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. "I have observed that during the day, only women visit him, while most men are busy with work." Yet another, whose breath smelled faintly of the wine he claimed to condemn, muttered, "He speaks ill of those who indulge in excessive drinking and revelry. Let's go and provoke those men separately, the ones who love their wine and their pleasures, and tell them he has insulted their way of life. Baba advises against such things, so they will turn against him." The words found quick agreement. One by one, nods passed around the circle. The plan was set in motion. Within a few days, a whispering campaign against Veer began to drift through the villages like smoke through dry air. It was not loud at first, but it carried. Gradually, the wave of suspicion grew stronger. Husbands began to look at their wives with narrowed eyes when they mentioned visiting the Baba. Brothers questioned sisters, fathers shadowed daughters. Doubt had been planted, and it spread with unsettling speed. The unrest did not go unnoticed. Observing the growing conflicts and unease among the people, word soon reached the court of the king of Shivgarh. The king, a man who valued the stability of his realm above all, listened with a furrowed brow as the news was relayed. He wanted peace, peace at any cost. And so he summoned his prime minister, a trusted man of measured speech, and ordered a full investigation. Days passed before the prime minister returned, the dust of travel still on his robes. He bowed before the throne and began his report. Your Majesty, in a jungle outside Shivgarh, there resides a young and educated ascetic. He also possesses some weapons, which he used for clearing the forest. Most of the people hold him in high regard. Baba doesn't talk much, but people believe that their pending tasks are resolved once they visit him. The Prime Minister paused, his tone shifting slightly. On the other hand, many priests from the city consider him a complete impostor. Women quickly finish their household chores and rush to him. He has also gathered some followers, which has sparked disputes. The presence of these followers has stirred controversy, potentially due to differing opinions, conflicting interests, or competing ideologies. It implies that the emergence of this following has created a divisive or contentious atmosphere, with disputes arising as a result. He glanced toward the door. I have brought along the leader of these priests as well, stationed outside the palace. Bring him inside, the king ordered. The doors opened, and the leader of the priests entered. His robes were fine but worn thin at the elbows, and his expression was a mixture of self-importance and barely concealed resentment. The king's frown deepened. Tell me, what do you want and why? The priest bowed slightly, but his voice carried no humility. Your Highness, our livelihoods have been snatched away. Now, no one in the village is willing to perform ceremonies or any religious rituals. Baba advises them to work hard and have faith in themselves. At this rate, the practice of religion will cease to exist. All will be ruined by the misleading of a false man. The king leaned forward, his tone sharpening. How can you claim that he is a false man? Provide evidence for your claim. But the leader of the priests was ready for this. Twisting the king's words to suit his own ends, he replied smoothly, Your Majesty, we are all old priests and have been living in Shivgarh since birth. This holy Baba is a stranger and an unknown person. Rather, let him prove that he is right. The king leaned back upon his carved sandalwood throne, his eyes narrowed in thought. The flickering light from the tall oil lamps on either side of the hall threw sharp lines across his face, making him appear older and more burdened than his years. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice firm but not without a trace of reluctance. Okay then, he said at last, consult among yourselves and come up with a solution to prove whether he is the right person or a false Baba. The words hung in the grand hall, and the gathered priests, sensing an unexpected victory, exchanged furtive glances. They bowed, their silken robes rustling like dry leaves, and backed out of the royal court, their voices, sharp and urgent, cut through the warm afternoon air. We must do something that will leave no doubt, said one, his brow beaded with sweat, not entirely from the heat. Something so decisive that even his followers will turn away. An older priest, whose lined face was set in a mask of cold calculation, leaned in. We will heat a great frying pan of oil in the midst of everyone, the common folk, the soldiers, the nobles. Then, we shall have the king's soldiers place the Baba into it. Whether it proves his innocence or not, he will surely die. We will say that if he survives, then he is right, but if he dies, he is an impostor. People will call all his teachings ungodly, for he could not save himself. The cruelty of the suggestion brought a low murmur of assent from the others. They could already imagine the spectacle, the crowd gasping, the flames licking at the base of the iron pan, the final humiliation of the man who had stolen their influence. This plan, sinister and absolute, was relayed to the Prime Minister in clipped, confident tones. The king, when informed, did not disguise his distaste. His lips tightened. This was not the sort of justice he wished to be remembered for. And yet, the words he had spoken in court, granting them the authority to choose the trial, could not easily be withdrawn without making himself appear weak or partial. The following morning, he summoned the Prime Minister to the inner chamber. His voice, though measured, carried the weight of a man reluctantly bound by his own decree. "Announce in public," he instructed, "that as per my command, after sunrise on the day of the upcoming full moon, all the people should gather in the battlefield. Security arrangements must be made. A wide boundary is to be set, far from the heated frying pan. No one must come too close." He paused, his gaze shifting from the open balcony, where the city's rooftops baked under the late morning sun, back to his minister. "And besides that, Prime Minister, bring that holy Baba secretly to the palace, with great respect, so that we may meet him before the trial." The Prime Minister hesitated, his eyes flickering with unease. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "you have made a decision based on just one side of the story. With all due respect, you should also meet this holy Baba yourself before passing judgment." The king's gaze softened, though his tone remained steady. "I desire peace and tranquility in the kingdom. If the priests are calm, they will not create further disturbance for now. As for the other side, I will also advise the holy man to refrain from violence and will try my best to avoid harm to anyone. That is why I suggested meeting him in private before enforcing my decision." A faint smile crossed the Prime Minister's lips. "Well done, Your Majesty. You are very wise, and at such a young age, you have shown great wisdom in politics." The king nodded once, dismissing him with a wave of the hand. The Prime Minister lost no time. By the afternoon, he had set out for the jungle, accompanied by attendants bearing gifts, silks wrapped in fragrant sandalwood shavings, a necklace of diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, and other offerings fit for one held in high esteem. The journey took him along winding forest paths where shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the canopy, where parrots startled from branches flew overhead in sudden bursts of green and scarlet. At last, the clearing came into view, a quiet, simple place, where the holy Baba sat upon a low mat woven of coarse reeds, his eyes half-closed in meditation. The Prime Minister approached, removed his sandals, and bowed low before him, placing the gifts at his feet. Veer opened his eyes slowly, his gaze calm yet piercing. Surprise flickered across his face as he took in the sight of silks, jewels, and the richly dressed courtier who had brought them. "These offerings are of no use to me," Veer said quietly. "You should take them back." The Prime Minister studied him closely, the straightness of his posture, the serene strength in his expression, the unshakable composure. In that moment, a thought rose unbidden in his mind. If he weren't a saint, I would have arranged my daughter's marriage to him, and he would have held a high place in the royal court. Masking the thought with a faint smile, he said, "Baba, our king has sent for you. You will have to accept, otherwise, his heart will be broken." Veer's brow furrowed slightly. "But I do not leave the jungle. I will not go." "No, you must go," the Prime Minister insisted gently, "for because of you, there are riots in Shivgarh. Some eminent personalities have already visited the palace with complaints." Veer tilted his head. "But no one told me anything. You will be kind enough to enlighten me." "No," the Prime Minister said firmly, "you have your devotees here. The matter will only escalate if discussed further." Veer rose to his feet, the decision in his eyes. "Well then, let us not delay any further." And so they began the journey back. The king had instructed that the holy Baba be brought directly to his private chamber. And though the monarch's reverence for him was genuine, Veer himself wondered, as they approached the palace gates of Shivga, what exactly he stood to gain from meeting this ruler, and whether the meeting would be the opening of truth or the beginning of a trap. The king leaned forward slightly, the golden fringe of his embroidered robe brushing against the carved armrest of the throne. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of an uneasy conscience. "Great soul," he began, choosing his words with deliberate care, "the situation is such that there is no restriction on any saint residing in my kingdom. However, due to your presence, some saints and priests have had to stop their religious practices. I do not know who is right and who is wrong, but some people in the kingdom are causing unrest. They accuse you of spending more time with women and doubt your character." Veer did not move. His posture remained upright yet relaxed, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His gaze was fixed on the king, but his eyes betrayed neither anger nor defensiveness, only an unwavering attentiveness, as though every word were being stored in some deep chamber of his mind for later reflection. The king's voice dipped lower, as though reluctant to speak the next part aloud. "They want you to prove that you are a true saint," he said, "by placing you in a container of boiling oil. They believe that if you have a pure mind and a virtuous character, nothing will happen to you." For a moment, the vast marble chamber seemed to recede from Veer's awareness. The torches lining the walls, the flickering light on polished stone, the guarded but curious eyes of the attendants, all faded into a stillness that was entirely his own. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind them, Chandrika's face emerged, not as a princess now, but as something beyond earthly station. He remembered the day she had taken his hand and extracted that solemn promise from him, that he would never take his own life. At the time, he had thought it a simple request, a matter of personal loyalty. But over time, her words had taken root, changing him in ways he had not anticipated. The restless pulse of a commander's mind, the reflex to calculate, to conquer, to command, had grown quiet. In its place, a stillness had formed, deep and strangely luminous, as though the promise itself had opened a hidden door. "Chandrika. Now you appear to me as a guru," he thought. "Your voice no longer belongs to just a woman of flesh and blood, but to something eternal that speaks through you." And with that thought came the awareness of an odd energy, something that encircled him when his eyes were closed, a presence that was not seen but felt, as though the air itself carried a hidden music. In it, there was knowledge, not taught but unveiled, seeping into him like the warmth of the early sun through mist. But even in that quiet, questions rose like distant bells. "Lord, if you are here, why can't I see you? Who are you? Who am I?" He felt the ache of that longing, the human hunger to know one's own origin, to look upon the face of the unseen. And yet, a sober acceptance followed swiftly. "I may not find the answer in this lifetime. The sands in my hourglass have nearly run out." Still, there was no bitterness in that thought. Only love, vast, impartial, encompassing. "I love everyone," he realized. "And I wish to do something for everyone. If my death brings peace to a kingdom, then I should die." His breath deepened. With that decision, the stillness within him hardened into resolve. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The king, watching, felt a flicker of unease. The saint's silence seemed too deep, his gaze too penetrating. A superstitious chill passed over him. Perhaps the man was cursing him in that moment. His heartbeat quickened, and his words stumbled out in hurried explanation. "Great soul," he said quickly, "you haven't heard my entire statement. These are all allegations made by people from the other side. I want you to leave everything behind and go far away from here. No one will even get a hint, and my trusted men will leave you in another kingdom where you can live in peace. I also do not want anyone's death, but I am forced by circumstances." His voice, once regal, now held a note of pleading, as though the decision he had announced to his court was less a decree than a trap he had walked into. Veer's eyes held a calm, unwavering light as he spoke, his voice neither raised in defiance nor lowered in submission. "No, Your Majesty, I am not a saint. I was a commander, and my duty was to protect the people. I will not run away out of fear." The words, simple yet firm, drifted into the marble stillness of the chamber. The king, hearing them, felt a faint stirring of something, perhaps admiration, perhaps confusion. The word commander meant little to him in this context. He thought it some term of self-respect, an ornament of speech from a man who still clung to pride. He did not understand the deeper truth in it, that Veer was not speaking from wounded ego, but from the iron oath of one who had once sworn to face death before abandoning his people. After receiving the king's formal leave, Veer promised without hesitation to return to Shivgarh before the full moon. The promise was given with such quiet certainty that even the courtiers, many of whom wished for his downfall, felt a flicker of doubt about what would happen when that day came. When the full moon finally arrived, the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Word had spread for days. There would be a trial unlike any other, and the outcome would decide the fate of the so-called Holy Baba. At dawn, people began to stream toward the wide field outside the city walls. Farmers left their plows, women with infants on their hips hurried alongside traders and soldiers, and curious children clung to the hems of their elders' robes. By the time the sun had risen a hand's breadth above the horizon, the field was thick with humanity. Dust rose from the trampled earth, hanging in the air like a pale veil. Merchants sold sweetmeats and spiced tea to the gathering crowd. Others climbed the branches of nearby trees to get a better view. Veer arrived early, walking with an unhurried step, as though he were attending not his own trial, but some ritual he had seen 100 times before. His eyes moved briefly over the scene, the long wooden logs stacked in a neat mound, the massive iron cauldron already resting upon them, the priests standing in clusters with tight mouths and watchful eyes. The sight of them sent a subtle ripple through the crowd. Some spat in the dust at their feet, others muttered blessings for their courage. The logs were lit flames licked upward greedily, snapping and twisting in the breeze. The air grew thick with the pungent smell of burning resin and sap. Soon the oil in the cauldron began to shimmer, then quiver, and finally to bubble in great golden swells. The priests' eyes gleamed. Today, their enemy would be destroyed before all. Yet not everyone was united in bloodlust. There were those in the crowd whose hearts clenched at the sight. Women who had once brought garlands to Veer's hut in the forest, men whose illnesses had eased after his prayers, young boys who followed him with the wide-eyed devotion given only to heroes. Their faces were drawn with silent fear. Veer sat cross-legged near the cauldron, the heat drawing sweat to his brow. He closed his eyes. If I refuse, he thought, the people will kill me. If I enter the cauldron, death is certain. There was no path that did not lead to the same end. The question was not whether he would die, but how. Better to die a heroic death than be struck down like an animal fleeing the hunt. And still, like a thorn lodged deep in the mind, the unanswered question pierced him. Is there a God? Or am I only speaking to the shadows of my own thoughts? His meditation was broken by the heavy grip of soldiers. Without ceremony, they lifted him, his body light, almost serene in their grasp, and carried him toward the boiling cauldron. The moment they lowered him in, the flames leapt higher as though in triumph. The oil churned, sending hot splinters of liquid flying outward. The droplets struck the priests first, searing their skin, clinging to their robes. A scream rose from their ranks, and soon another, until the air was filled with their cries. Their faces contorted in agony, their limbs flailed as the oil's burn tore through them. But Veer felt nothing. No heat, no pain. The oil seemed strangely cool, as though the cauldron had been filled not with boiling liquid, but with the still waters of a shaded pond. He lifted one hand slowly, watching the golden surface break and ripple around his fingers. The sensation was so unreal that for a moment, he thought, perhaps I am already dead. Perhaps this is my soul, alive while my body lies beyond. He closed his eyes again. And there it was, a light, brilliant and boundless, pressing against the darkness behind his eyelids until it filled all thought. It was not merely bright, but living, a radiance that seemed to speak without words. I am the Almighty. I am in you, and in everyone, and everywhere. You are my son. Veer's hands folded together instinctively, his head bowing toward the light. His voice was a whisper, but it carried with the weight of an oath. O God, you are in me, and I am in you. The vision broke like a glass shattering in sunlight. His eyes opened, and the field came rushing back, the crowd's gasps, the pale sky, the priests collapsed on the ground. The oil lapped coolly around his waist, the surface flecked with sunlight. Around him, the priests who had cried for his death now lay writhing in pain, their skin blistered where the oil had touched them. Veer rose from the cauldron. His steps were slow but steady as he moved to the nearest priest. Without hesitation, he placed his hand upon the man's scorched flesh. Before the eyes of all, the wound smoothed and healed, leaving no trace of burn. One by one, he touched the others, and each time, the flesh knit itself whole, the pain vanished, and the priests could only bow their heads in awe. The crowd erupted, not in jeers, but in chants. Voices lifted prayers into the air, rising and falling like the tide. Blessed be the holy Baba. Blessed be his name. Veer stood amidst them, his mind quiet. The answer he had sought so long had been given. I have found him, he thought. And in finding him, I have found myself. The king, pale and shaken, pushed his way through the throng until he stood before Veer. In full view of his people, he bent and touched his forehead to the ground at the saint's feet. Forgive me, he said, his voice breaking. Veer looked down at him with calm compassion. I have also recognized him today, he said softly, and have found my identity.